Charles had always been a man of few words. In the sprawling, sun-drenched estate where he lived, his silence was as much a part of the landscape as the ancient oak trees. He moved through his days with a quiet predictability, a routine that had been his armor for the better part of a decade. His world was one of order. The horses needed tending at dawn, the ledgers needed balancing by noon, and the long, lonely evenings were for staring into the fire, the ghosts of his past dancing in the flames. The arrival of Kate, however, had begun to fracture that carefully constructed calm. She came as a guest of a distant cousin, a whirlwind of laughter and light in a house that had forgotten what either sounded like. Kate was a painter, her hands always stained with pigments of cobalt and ochre, and she saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. She found beauty in the peeling paint of the old stable doors and in the way the light caught the dust motes in the library. Charles found himself watching her, a fascination he couldn't quite name taking root in his chest. He would catch himself listening for her footsteps in the hall or looking up from his paperwork at the exact moment her laughter drifted through an open window. It was a feeling he had long since buried, a vulnerability he had sworn never to feel again. And the unspoken connection between them grew with each passing day. It was in the way she would bring him a cup of tea in the stables, knowing he forgot to take breaks. It was in the way he would leave a freshly cut rose on the small table on the terrace where she liked to paint. They spoke in these small gestures, a language that was deeper and truer than any conversation. Charles felt the walls he had built begin to tremble, and for the first time in years, he didn't immediately try to reinforce them. One late afternoon, they found themselves alone in the walled garden. The sun was a soft golden orb sinking below the old stone walls, painting the sky in hues of apricot and lavender. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and damp earth. Kate was standing by the old stone fountain, its basin filled with murky water and lily pads. She was tracing the carved figures on its side, her brow furrowed in concentration. Charles stood a few paces behind her, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The air between them felt charged, heavy with all the words that had gone unspoken. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. The gravel crunched under his boots, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. Kate didn't turn, but he saw her shoulders tense slightly, a sign she was acutely aware of his presence. He stopped just behind her, as close enough to smell the faint scent of turpentine and lavender that always clung to her. Slowly, his hand rose from his side, trembling almost imperceptibly. It was a moment of profound surrender, an act of reaching across the vast, empty space he had created around himself. His fingers gently brushed against hers where they rested on the cool stone of the fountain. Kate's breath hitched. Her hand was cool, and for a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then slowly, her fingers turned, lacing through his. It was the most honest and vulnerable thing Charles had done in a decade. The touch was electric, a silent confession of a feeling too large for words. They stood like that, connected by the simplest of touches, watching the sun dip below the horizon. For Charles, the world had narrowed to the feeling of her hand in his. It was a promise, a beginning. The unspoken emotion that had been building between them had finally found its voice, not in a declaration, but in a single, a trembling touch. The tender silence of the garden was shattered by the sharp crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. The sound was brisk, purposeful, and it cut through the fragile bubble Charles and Kate had created. They pulled their hands apart as if burned, turning to see Camilla, Charles's sister-in-law, standing at the entrance to the garden. Her presence was a stark intrusion of reality into their private world. Camilla was a woman sculpted by duty and societal expectation, and her posture always rigid, her expression perpetually etched with a faint critical frown. She had managed the estate since Charles's withdrawal from the world, and she guarded its protocols and, most importantly, its master, with a fierce, unyielding determination. Her sharp eyes had taken in the entire scene in an instant, the proximity, the stolen touch, the guilty flush on both their faces, a muscle feathered in her tightly clenched jaw. To her, this was not a blossoming of affection. It was a threat to the delicate order she had worked so hard to maintain. She saw Kate not as a woman bringing her brother-in-law back to life, but as an interloper, a variable that could disrupt the predictable, safe monotony of Charles's existence and, by extension, her own control over it. Camilla strode forward, her heels clicking against the stone path with an air of authority. "Charles," she said, her voice cool and clipped, carrying a pointed emphasis that deliberately excluded Kate. The Farthingale accounts need your attention. They sent another rider. It's urgent." It was a flimsy excuse, and they all knew it. The accounts could wait. This was about asserting dominance, reclaiming the territory she felt had been momentarily lost. Charles looked from Camilla to Kate, a flicker of the old, guarded man returning to his eyes. The magic of the moment was dissipating, replaced by a familiar weight of obligation. He gave Kate a small, an almost apologetic glance before turning to follow Camilla. As he fell into step beside her, heading back towards the main house, Camilla reached out and pressed firmly on his hand, the very hand that had just been holding Kate's. It was a possessive gesture, a physical command meant to sever the lingering connection. "Let go," the pressure seemed to say. "This is not for you. This is not who you are." Left alone in the fading light, Kate felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air, and the warmth of his touch was replaced by the cold stone of the fountain. She watched them walk away, a picture of duty and restraint, and a seed of doubt was planted in her heart. Had she imagined the whole thing? The unspoken emotion she felt from him was suddenly clouded by the imposing figure of Camilla, a silent sentinel dedicated to keeping the world, and perhaps especially her, at bay. Later that night, Charles retreated to his study, a sanctuary of dark wood and old books, and he tried to focus on the ledgers Camilla had left for him, but the numbers blurred into meaningless shapes. All he could see was Kate's face in the garden. All he could feel was the ghost of her hand in his. A quiet knock on the door made his heart leap, hoping it was her. It was Camilla. She entered without waiting for a response, carrying a tray with a single glass of whiskey. She set it down on his desk, her movements precise. "You've been distant lately, Charles," she said, and her voice softer now, but no less penetrating. She positioned herself by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on her stern features. "It's her, isn't it? The artist." She didn't pose it as a question. "I've seen the way you look at her, the way you forget yourself." Charles remained silent, staring into the amber liquid of his glass. Camilla sighed, a sound heavy with feigned concern. "I only want to protect you, Charles. You know that. You're not yourself right now. You're vulnerable. And she's a guest. She'll leave. They always do. You opened yourself up once, and it almost destroyed you. I won't stand by and watch you make the same mistake again. It's my duty to this family to ensure you don't." Her words were a calculated blend of affection and manipulation, designed to prey on his deepest fears: fear of abandonment, fear of pain, fear of the messy, unpredictable nature of love. She was reminding him of the safe, if lonely, prison he had built for himself, and she was the ever-vigilant warden. The seed of doubt she had planted in the garden was now being carefully watered. The following days were a masterclass in silent warfare. Camilla became a constant shadowing presence. Whenever Kate entered a room, Camilla would find a reason to need Charles elsewhere. She would schedule meetings during the hours Kate usually painted in the garden. She would sit with them during meals, steering the conversation towards dull and estate-related matters, effectively silencing any chance for private words between them. Her campaign was subtle but relentless, a quiet erosion of the fragile connection that had been forged. Kate, sensing the shift, felt a growing frustration. The easy, unspoken camaraderie she had shared with Charles was replaced by strained glances and fleeting, unsatisfactory moments. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between the man who had reached for her hand and the man who was being pulled back into his shell by the formidable Camilla. The house, once full of possibility, now felt stifling, its grand halls echoing with unspoken tension. Charles, trapped in the middle, felt himself fracturing. Every time he saw Kate, his heart ached to go to her, to pick up where they left off, but Camilla's words echoed in his mind, feeding his ancient insecurities. He began to doubt his own feelings, wondering if Camilla was right. Was he being foolish? Was he setting himself up for another devastating fall? The fear was a cold, familiar friend, and under Camilla's relentless pressure, it began to wrap its tendrils around him once more. The silent, hopeful man who had reached for Kate was slowly being replaced by the guarded, fearful ghost of his past. The breaking point came on the morning of Kate's intended departure. Her visit was drawing to a natural close, and Camilla had made sure every moment of her final days was as uncomfortable as possible. Charles had avoided being alone with her, a cowardice that shamed him but felt safer than the alternative. He was in the stable, brushing down his horse with a mechanical, desperate focus, trying to lose himself in the simple, physical task. He hadn't heard her approach. "Leaving without saying goodbye, Charles?" Her voice was soft, but it cut through the quiet like a bell. He spun around. Kate stood in the doorway of the stable, backlit by the morning sun. She wore a simple traveling dress, and her small bag was on the ground beside her. She looked tired, the usual sparkle in her eyes dimmed. In that moment, stripped of all pretense, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The sight of her, ready to walk out of his life, was a physical blow to his chest, far more painful than any fear Camilla had conjured. "Kate," he started, his voice rough, and he took a step towards her, the horse forgotten. "I came to thank you," she said, her voice carefully even, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "For the roses, for the kindness." She paused, struggling to maintain her composure. For a moment, I thought there was something more. But I see I was mistaken." She looked away, unable to bear the pain in his conflicted eyes. "Camilla made it quite clear where your priorities lie. With the estate, with the past, with safety." The words safety dripped with a gentle, heartbreaking accusation. "I hope you find the peace you're looking for, Charles." She bent to pick up her bag. The finality in her voice was a thunderclap that shattered the last of his paralysis. The fear of loss, the real, tangible loss of her, suddenly dwarfed the abstract fear of future pain that Camilla had so carefully cultivated. He saw his entire future stretching before him, an endless procession of empty, silent days. And it was a future without her. The thought was unbearable. The walls he had built, the armor he had worn, it all crumbled in an instant, not with a dramatic crash, but with the quiet, desperate understanding that he was about to let the best thing in his life walk away. "Kate, wait!" His voice was stronger now. He crossed the space between them in 2 quick strides and gently took her bag from her hand, setting it back down. He didn't touch her, not yet, but he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You're not mistaken." The words were a struggle, torn from a place he had kept locked away for so long. "I was a coward. I let fear speak for me." But she was wrong.